"Foolish cowboy, you made me love you," said the Navajo woman after he came back wounded. The long writer's 60 minutes. There's a knife in the drawer of my desk that I haven't touched in 11 years. Long blade, bone handle, wrapped at the guard with a strip of red-dyed sinew she put on herself one winter when the wrapping was coming loose. I look at it some mornings. Not every morning, I'm not the kind of man who makes a ritual of his own life, but some. When the light hits the bone handle just right, I can still see her hands working that sinew, mouth pressed flat the way she had, concentrating. She called me a foolish cowboy more times than I can count. Said it the way some women say darling, not mean, not soft either, just plain and certain, like calling a horse a horse. I'll tell you how I earned it. My name is Cal Briggs. I was 34 years old the autumn I'm talking about. I'd been riding with the Cutter outfit for 2 seasons, small ranch, north of Gallup, straddling the line between New Mexico territory and the Navajo land to the west. George Cutter ran maybe 400 head, paid fair, and didn't ask questions about where a man came from or what he'd left behind him. That suited me. I had come from Missouri. I had left behind a wife who preferred someone else and a brother who preferred whiskey to daylight, and I had no interest in talking about either. I did my work. I was competent at it, good with horses, decent with rope, knew cattle well enough to spot a sick one before it turned the rest. Cutter knew what he had in me. He didn't say so directly, but he knew. He gave me the good work, the long rides, the fence line nobody else wanted to patrol in winter, the decisions on the trail when he wasn't there. That was enough for me. I didn't need the speech. There were 4 of us regulars, and then whatever day riders Cutter hired as needed. The other regulars were Dobie, who was Mexican and had been with Cutter since before there was a ranch to speak of, and 2 brothers named Holt, Rance, and Tuck, who'd come up from Texas and brought a Texas opinion about most things, the weather, the food, the land, and particularly about the Navajo. I didn't share it. I had no strong feeling either way. I was an outsider in the territory myself. Her name was Ahihi. The word means thank you in Dene Bizod, her language, though she told me that wasn't why she'd been given it, that it was an old family name going back farther than she knew. Her people called her that. George Cutter called her Mary. I called her Ahihi once she told me how. She came to the Cutter place in September, hired to cook and clean through the fall and winter. Cutter's wife had died the year before, his daughter had married and left for Arizona, and he was getting on. He needed help in the house. She was 30 or near it. Dark hair with a few threads of early gray that she wore pulled back and knotted. She had a way of moving through a room that was very still, not slow, just contained, like everything she did was considered before she did it. Her English was better than Rance Holt's. Her cooking was better than anyone's I'd encountered in 2 years of ranch grub. I noticed her. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place, and I was smart enough to know it. What I didn't know then, what I had no way of knowing, was that she had noticed something about me too, though what it was she noticed I didn't find out until much later. She told me once, after I'd asked her direct, that she had watched me with the horses. Said there was something in the way I worked with them that told her I could be trusted. I didn't understand that at the time, what horses had to do with it. I understand it now. The trouble started in October, with a man named Ford. Lyle Ford ran a competing outfit about 30 miles east of Cutter's. Not a big operation, about the same size, but Ford was the kind of man who could not stand someone having something he didn't, and what he didn't have was the particular stretch of water and grass between his land and Cutter's. He'd been making noise about it for 2 years. Letters to the county office. Fence cut twice in summer. A calf found dead in a draw that had no explanation. In early October, Ford hired 3 men who were not cowboys in any useful sense of the word. They were fighters. I could see it in how they sat a horse, how they wore their guns. You spend enough time around working men and around other kinds of men, you can tell the difference. One night in the 2nd week of October, Dobie came in from the north line and said 2 of Ford's men had been pushing 50 head of Cutter's cattle toward the eastern fence. When Dobie challenged them, they'd backed off, but they hadn't gone far, just pulled up on the ridge and watched. Cutter rode out to see Ford the next morning. Took Rance Holt with him, which was a mistake in my view, Rance being the kind of man whose temper precedes his sense, but it wasn't my call. They came back at noon. Cutter said nothing had been resolved. That evening, I sat on the top rail of the fence near the barn and thought about it. Ahihi came out of the house to the well and drew water, and on her way back she slowed and looked at me. "You're thinking about Ford," she said. I'm thinking about a lot of things. You think it will get worse? I looked at her, don't you? She set the bucket down on the ground and rested one hand on the well housing. The sun was low, the light coming across the flat reddish and thin. She didn't answer right away. My uncle's land borders Ford's on the south, she said. His cattle have gone missing too. That was the first real conversation we had. I don't remember everything we said. It was maybe 15 minutes standing there in the fading light, but I remember the weight of it. That feeling of talking to someone who sees the same thing you're seeing and doesn't flinch from it. She wasn't asking me to fix it. She wasn't scared. She was just looking at it clear. I got down off the fence. I'll talk to Cutter, I said. She picked up her bucket. He won't send you to Ford. He'll think it makes things worse. I know, I said. I'll talk to him anyway. She started back toward the house, then stopped just once and looked back at me. Be careful with the Holt brothers, she said, especially Rance. I didn't ask her why. I should have asked her why. Through October the pressure built slow, the way weather builds invisible until it isn't. Ford's men rode the boundary line most days. 2 more of Cutter's calves turned up dead, one with a .44 hole in it, which made it less of a mystery but more of a problem. Cutter went back to the county office and filed a formal complaint, and the county office sent a letter saying they'd look into it in the spring. I started riding the north and east lines myself mornings before the regular work. Not assigned, I just did it. Cutter didn't say anything about the extra hours. He knew what they were worth, and so did I. Evenings I'd come in and water my horse, and sometimes Ahihi would be at the well or at the woodpile and we'd talk. It was nothing that announced itself as anything. Just 2 people in the same place at the end of the day, talking about what was in front of them. She told me about her family. She had a daughter, 7 years old, living with Ahihi's mother, while Ahihi worked the Cutter place through the winter. She talked about the girl the way people talk about something that is the realest thing in their life, plain and without embellishment. Her husband had died 4 years before, a horse accident. She didn't talk about him much, not out of grief particularly, I got the sense, but out of a natural economy. What was gone was gone. I told her a little about Missouri, about the wife who'd left. She didn't offer me sympathy, and I didn't want any. She just listened and then said something that I've thought about many times since. She said, that kind of hurt, it makes men one of 2 ways. Either they close and stay closed, or it burns off the things that weren't worth keeping and what's left is better. I said, which kind do you think I am? She looked at me a long moment. I'm still deciding, she said. The last week of October, Rance Holt did something stupid. He'd been drinking in Gallup on a Saturday and ran into one of Ford's fighters, the one they called Mackey, at the bar. Words were said. Rance pulled his gun. Mackey's partner was behind him and Rance didn't see the partner. He got pistol whipped, bad enough that Dobie had to go into town with a wagon and bring him back. I won't say I felt nothing watching Cutter tend to Rance's swollen face that evening, but what I mostly felt was dread because I could see what was coming. The next move would be Rance's, and Rance's next move was never a measured one. 2 days later, Rance rode out at night. Alone, he didn't tell Cutter, he didn't tell his brother. He rode to the boundary line and shot at Ford's fence line rider in the dark. He hit him. Not dead, hit him in the shoulder, but hit him. By morning Ford knew, and by noon Ford had sent a rider to the county with a sworn complaint, and by evening it was clear that Cutter's outfit was now the accused party in whatever was going to happen next. Rance had turned a legal situation into an illegal one, and Cutter's complaint about the dead calves was now buried under the assault complaint against Rance. I told Cutter I would ride to Ford's and try to negotiate. I don't know what I thought I could accomplish. I know now I was doing what I always did, which was believing that a problem could be reasoned with if a man approached it straight enough. Cutter said no, don't go near Ford's. I went anyway. I rode out before dawn, 2 days after Rance's shooting, on a Tuesday morning in November with the cold already in it, the ground hard and the sky low and gray. I left a note in the barn saying where I'd gone. I wasn't sneaking, I just couldn't afford the argument. I got as far as the draw about a half-mile east of Ford's eastern fence. There were 2 of them waiting. Mackey and the third man, the one I didn't know the name of. They'd been tipped, I don't know how. Maybe they'd seen me ride the line. Maybe someone at Ford's had found Cutter's note, it doesn't matter. Mackie put a bullet through my left side before I had my gun clear. I got off the horse going down. I don't remember hitting the ground. I remember the horse screaming and running, and I remember the cold dirt of the draw against my face. And I remember thinking very clearly in a strange, calm voice in my head, "You foolish man. You foolish, foolish man." I don't know how long I was in that draw. Long enough for the bleeding to slow, not stop, just slow, and for the temperature to drop, and for the gray sky to go white and then dark again. I know I slept, or lost consciousness, which amounts to the same thing when a man is lying in a dirt draw with a bullet hole in him in November. What I remember next, with any clarity, is a hand on my face. Not grabbing, pressing flat palm, just checking. And then a voice, low, not whispering, saying something in Dene Bizad that I couldn't understand, and then in English, "You're not dead." I said something, I don't know what, something about the horse. "The horse came back to the ranch," she said. "That's how I found you." I tried to sit up. She put one hand flat on my chest and pushed me back down without particular effort or gentleness. "Don't." She had a pack with her. She worked in the dark, it was full night now, and I couldn't see most of what she did, but I could feel it. The shirt cut away, something cold and sharp-smelling on the wound, cloth bound tight. She worked fast. She worked like someone who'd done this kind of thing before, not frantic, not talking to fill the silence. I said, "You shouldn't be out here." "I know that," she said. "Ford's men are back at his ranch drinking," she said. "I watched them go in." She tied off whatever she'd bound me with and sat back on her heels. Even in the dark, I could see her face, or the shape of it. "You rode out alone to negotiate with a man who already tried to take George Cutter's water rights and had his hired man shoot your partner. What did you think was going to happen?" "I thought I could talk to him." "Foolish cowboy," she said. It was the first time she said it. I lay there in the cold of that draw and heard it, and I know something in me cracked open a little. Not in the way wounds crack open, in the other way. "Can you ride?" she said. "If you help me up." It took both of us. I was taller and heavier than her, but she managed it, got under my good arm and took my weight without complaint. Got me onto the horse she'd brought, not my horse, one of Cutter's steadier animals, and wrapped the reins around my good hand and rode alongside me the whole 3 miles back to the ranch, in the dark, in November cold, with one hand on my arm the whole way to make sure I didn't fall. It was a through-and-through wound. The bullet had missed the lung. Dobie's wife, who knew more medicine than anyone else in 30 miles, came out the next morning and pronounced me in bad shape but survivable, which is about as good as you can hope for. I was in the bunkhouse 4 days. On the second day, Cutter came in and stood at the foot of my bed and looked at me. "You went anyway," he said. "I did." He stood there a while, then, "You thought you could fix it." "I thought I could try." He nodded slow like a man accepting something he can't change. Then he said, "She rode out after you on her own, didn't tell me, didn't ask, just went." I didn't answer. "Took the sorrel and the pack and went looking in the dark," he said. "Found you in that draw before you bled out." He looked at the floor. "I'd have found you in the morning, be a different story." He left after that, didn't say anything else about it. On the third morning, Ahi came to the bunkhouse. She didn't make anything of it. She brought food, same as she'd brought the 2 mornings before, set it on the crate beside the bed and started to go. I said her name. She turned. I said, "You could have been shot." "Yes," she said. "Ford's men." "We're not there," she said. "I told you that." "But they could have been." She looked at me evenly. "Yes." I didn't know what I wanted to say. I wanted to say thank you, which felt like nothing. I wanted to say why did you go, why that draw, why in the dark without telling anyone, but I couldn't find the shape of the question. Finally, I said, "Why didn't you send Dobie?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, Dobie would have taken time to saddle up and find George and explain. By then it might have been too late. "That's not what I mean," I said. "I mean why risk yourself?" She looked at me a long time. There was something in her face that was not exactly softness and not exactly hardness either. Something steady, decided, like a woman who has looked at a question and reached the answer and is at peace with both. "Because I didn't want you to die in that draw," she said. "Why?" She picked up the empty bowl from the morning before, set it against her hip. "Because," she said, Sometime in the last 2 months you became someone I would not like to lose. She said it plain, like calling a horse a horse. She left before I could answer. I lay in that bunk and looked at the ceiling of the bunkhouse, the rough-cut timber, the gaps where cold came through, the old nail someone had driven in crookedly and never pulled, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time, maybe ever. Felt like I was real, felt like I mattered to someone in a way that wasn't about what I could do, but about what I was. That she had ridden out in the cold dark and found me in that draw not because I was useful, but because I was me. I'm not going to dress it up better than that. That's what it was. On the 4th morning, I got up. I shouldn't have. Dobie's wife had said a week minimum. But I'm not built for lying still, and I was afraid that if I didn't move, I would lose something, some forward momentum, some small grip on the shape of things. I got dressed slowly, laced my boots one-handed, and walked out into the cold morning. The sky was clear for the first time in a week, the kind of cold, clean sky you get in November when the weather has moved through and left the air like glass. The mountains north of us had snow on them. The ground had frost, and my boots broke through it with each step, and the sound of it was very loud and very specific, that particular crunch you only hear before the sun gets up. I went to the barn. I wasn't going to do anything. I wasn't capable of doing anything. I just needed to stand in the barn, smell hay and manure and horse sweat and leather, and feel like I was part of the working world again. He was there. She was currying the sorrel, the horse she'd ridden out on that night to find me. She'd already given it water. There was a fresh bucket beside the stall. She didn't hear me come in over the sound of the brush. I stood in the barn door and watched her work. The light came in low behind me, and it caught her in a way I can still see, the set of her shoulders, the economical motion of her arms, the gray threads in her dark hair. The horse stood very still for her, the way horses do for people they trust. She turned when she heard me breathe. "You should be in bed," she said. "Probably." She set the brush on the stall rail and looked at me. She looked at my side, where the wound was, the way a person looks at something they know is there even when they can't see it. "Coming out of the cold at least," she said. "Come sit." There was a hay bale near the back. I sat on it, slow, and she got a second one and put it near enough that we weren't apart but not so near that it was anything declared. We sat there for a while in the quiet. The sorrel moved in the stall. Somewhere outside a cow lowed once and went silent. "My daughter's name is Shinada," she said. "It means my corn silk. She has her father's eyes. She has my—" She stopped. "She has my mouth. I'm told that's not a compliment." I looked at her. Whoever said that was wrong. She didn't smile. She almost never smiled in the way I'd been taught to look for, teeth and all of that. But something in her face shifted a small amount, like water moved by a breath of air. "She would like you," Ahei said. "She likes men who are quiet with horses." "I'd like to meet her sometime," I said, and then I sat with what I'd said, not taking it back. She sat with it too, neither of us in a hurry. After a while she said, "When Ford's man shot you. When you were in that draw, what did you think about?" "Honestly, always honestly. I thought about the horse," I said, and then I thought about how I'd been an idiot. I looked at the barn floor. "And then, after a while, I thought about you. About the conversation we had at the well, the first one, when you told me Ford had been pushing your uncle's cattle, too. I thought about how clear-eyed you were, how you looked at the thing and didn't flinch." She was quiet. I stopped. I thought I would like to have more conversations like that one. She looked at me for a long time. The light had come up a little more. The frost outside was starting to melt at the edges. "Foolish cowboy," she said, "but different from before, quieter." "I know," I said. "You made me come find you in the dark," she said. "I had to ride 3 miles in the cold and drag you out of a ditch." "A draw," I said. "Technically it was a draw." She picked up a piece of straw from the bale and held it in her fingers. "You could have died." "I know. If the horse hadn't come back." "I know." She turned the piece of straw in her fingers. "When I found you," she stopped, started again. "When I found you and you were breathing, I put my hand on your chest and felt your heart, and she set the straw down. "I sat there in the cold for a moment, just sat there." "What were you thinking?" I said. "I was thinking," she said, "that you foolish cowboy, you made me love you." I'll be plain about what happened after, because the details of it, the way it worked out practically, matter as much as the feeling. I talked to Cutter, told him I wanted to stay on not just through winter but permanent if he'd have me in that capacity. He said he'd been expecting the conversation for a while. Ford's situation resolved itself, the way bad men's situations tend to. One of his hired fighters killed another in a card game outside Gallup in December, which brought the law down and Ford's name into it, and by spring the whole enterprise had collapsed under its own weight. The land dispute went to a territorial judge who ruled in Cutter's favor in March. I didn't do that. It just happened. But it happened, and I was still there when it did, which felt like it mattered. Ahihi's daughter came to the Cutter place at Christmas. Her name I could not pronounce right at first. It took me the better part of a month to get the sounds in the right order, and she thought this was the funniest thing she'd ever seen, a grown man tangled up by a word. She had her father's eyes, like Ahihi had said, and she had Ahihi's mouth, and whoever had told Ahihi that her mouth was not a compliment had been a fool. I learned some Dene Bizod, not a great deal, enough to say what needed to be said in the language that was hers first. We were married in the spring. Not a church wedding. There was a ceremony with her people, her mother and her uncles, and a man who I came to understand was something between a judge and a priest. And it was done in Dene Bizod with Ahihi translating the parts that required my participation, which was most of it. I stood there in the cold spring morning on the land near her mother's place, and said the words I was told to say and meant them in a way that surprised me, the directness of it, the weight. Her uncle whose cattle Ford had taken, a quiet man with a face like weathered sandstone, who spoke almost no English, shook my hand at the end of the ceremony. He held my hand for a moment longer than a handshake requires and looked at me, and I don't know what he said to Ahihi afterward, but she told me later it was, roughly, that I seemed steady. That was the best thing anyone had said about me in years. We lived at the Cutter place for 2 more years, and then Cutter died quietly in his sleep, which is how he would have wanted it, and left the operation to me and Dobie jointly, with the understanding that we'd run it together or dissolve it, whichever we chose. Dobie wanted to go back to Mexico. We sold off the herd, split the proceeds fair, and I bought a smaller piece of land, 60 acres on a creek, west of where Cutter's had been, on the edge of the Navajo land. It was good land, good water, which in that country is the whole story. I ran a small herd, did work for other outfits as needed, raised horses. Ahihi's daughter grew up on that land. She learned to ride and to read and to do figures and to cook and to speak 4 languages, which I find remarkable when I count them. Dene Bizod, English, Spanish, and a bit of the Pueblo language from the family of a friend. At 16 she had her mother's way of standing that contained stillness, and her mother's manner of looking at a thing plain. And she also had a laugh that was nothing like her mother's, that came from somewhere entirely her own, loud and sudden and honest. I was not her blood father. I've never pretended otherwise, and she's never needed me to be otherwise. What I was, what I am, is the man who stayed, the man who was there. She came to call me something in Dene Bizod that doesn't translate exactly, that sits somewhere between father and the man of the house and the one who is reliable. I'll take it. Ahihi died in my 58th year. Pneumonia in the bad winter. She was sick 4 days and gone on the 5th, which is not enough time for a man to prepare himself, though I wonder sometimes if any amount of time is. I am 63 now. I live alone on the 60 acres. The horses are fewer. My daughter, I call her my daughter, she is my daughter, lives 30 miles east with her husband and their 2 children. She comes out most Sundays. She brings food and the children run wild in the barn, and I sit on the porch and watch them and think, this is what it looks like when a life works out. I have the knife in the desk drawer. I have the sorrel, not the original sorrel. She's been gone 20 years, but one of the line, same color, same steady disposition. I named her the same name. I figure she earned the name just by being what she is. I have the memory of a woman who rode out in the cold November dark and found me in a draw and put her hand on my chest and felt my heart and sat with me in the barn the next week and told me plain that I'd made her love me. I didn't deserve it. That's not self-pity, that's accounting. I had ridden out on a fool's errand alone, against Cutter's direct order, got myself shot, and then lain in a dirt draw bleeding and unconscious, while the woman I had been quietly and carefully not admitting to myself that I loved had saddled a horse and ridden 3 miles in the dark to drag me back to the living. What I know is this: some men, most men maybe, go a whole life and never get looked at the way she looked at me. Not looked at like an object or a provider or a convenience, but looked at like, you specifically are worth the trouble. You, with your wounds and your stubbornness and your Missouri history and your way with horses and your habit of riding into things you can't reason with, you are someone I will not allow to die in a draw. That's a rare thing, that's a gift. I've tried to be worth it. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I've tried, and I think she knew I was trying, and I think she thought it was enough. This morning I woke early, before light. I dressed and went to the barn out of habit, same habit I've had for 30 years, checking horses before the sun gets up. And it was cold, November cold. The same particular cold I remember from the morning after she found me, that hard, clean cold that comes when the weather has moved through and the air has no give in it. The sorrel turned her head when I came in, looked at me the way horses look at the people they know, with that particular still attention. I stood in the barn door and looked at her, and the light came up slow outside, and the frost on the ground started to give at the edges, and I thought about Ahihi's hands on that knife handle, wrapping the sinew, her mouth pressed flat, concentrating. I thought about her saying, "Foolish cowboy, you made me love you." I thought about a man getting a second chance. Not to be young, that's not what I'm saying, not to undo the things that needed undoing, but a second chance at being seen, at being known for what you actually are, not what you couldn't manage to be, at having a good woman stand beside you and say, "This one, this man, with all of it, I'll stay." That's the thing, finally, that's what it comes to. The sorrel turned back to her water. I went in and made coffee and sat at the desk with the drawer open and the knife sitting there in the morning light, and I was not sad. I was not sad. I was something more complicated than that, something that had grief in it and gratitude in it, and the particular feeling of being a man who was given more than he had any right to expect and knew it, and did his best not to waste it. I set my hand on the bone handle. The sinew is red, she dyed it herself. I left my hand there for a while. Then I closed the drawer, finished my coffee, and went out to work. And